This is Stu Taylor. Joining me now is Joshua Solloway. He's the chairman and CEO of the Solloway Group, managing director, Rainmaker Global Business Development, and it's nice to have you with us.
Thank you, Stu.
Talk a little about your company and what you do. I know it's multifaceted.
Sure. Well, you have to be multifaceted these days. Solloway Group is a boutique law firm, just a few of us, focused on helping international resource companies access U.S. capital, basically achieve what they need to achieve down here. Most recently and most significantly, we've been heavily focused on the OTCQX marketplace, where we have been listing companies from other exchanges here in the U.S., making them more accessible to U.S. investors in a much more affordable and effective manner.
However, there's a certain contradiction here as you look at what's going on and restrictions, whether you're looking at banks, whether you're looking at venture capital, you're looking at all kinds of conventional institution money. It's dried up. It's difficult to get. What are you running into?
Interestingly, I think people are getting very creative. Something I mentioned previously in the talk I just gave. I'm seeing, from a fundraising perspective, insurance funds looking for long-term investments, looking to get involved in the resource game, understanding that they have long timelines to production, and frankly, they've invested in in-house teams of some of the best geologists and analysts that in the industry. Seeing pretty aggressive bond financing out of Europe, which has been very interesting, even in spite of the current market. One thing I think is really interesting is that all that's going on in Europe is really called into question the value or the security as an entrepreneur or a debtor of any sort of the idea of sovereign-based capital as a provider of capital. The fact is, it's just not as secure as people thought. These creditors are not as safe as people thought because they have larger concerns, obligations to constituents that are citizens. They can cut and run at any moment. So it's very interesting to see some of these pension funds looking to fill that void, and I actually am speaking pretty regularly to a few of them out in Europe, which I find just fascinating. They're not that concerned.
Well, this was an interesting contrast. We truly live in a global marketplace. No longer can we live as protectionists, as isolationists. We live in this global marketplace. It's inseparable. How do you compare the credit situation, the allocation of capital resources in Europe to here in the States, or in North America?
Well, I mean, I think obviously it's such a wound up and loaded question in a way, because if we do see a real outright implosion in Europe, our institutions here in the U.S. are not insulated from that by any stretch. We'll certainly see constrained infrastructure development projects worldwide, which will certainly cascade into the commodities sector in terms of potentially decreasing demand for some of the commodities, obviously, that drive those developments. But nonetheless, even in a constrained economy where governments in places like China, you have a centrally managed economy with tremendous forex reserves and government-owned banks that can stave some of the bleeding, and a willingness to implement FDR-type, New Deal-type policies, really, frankly, New Deal on steroids, to develop the infrastructure. And I think obviously there are cascading effects from Europe in the private sector, but I think when you look at commodity prices, I think they have a long ways to run, given the fact that the demand side drivers are there in spite of what happens in Europe.
From a strategic point of view, is your advice different now than it was 6 months ago, a year ago, 3 years ago?
I look at the cycles. I think we all learn through these cycles. Far be it from me to say, obviously, that I have the answers at any point in time. None of us do. I think the best thing you can do is say what you think confidently and hope people believe you and they don't call you to task a few months later. But the truth of the matter is, I really think if you look at over the last 130 years, average cycles of 17 to 18 years, as Jim Rogers has talked about at length, and given looking beyond the monetary drivers of the commodities side sector towards the consumption factors, constraining supply, increased demand at every moment, with every day, as there's a growing middle class internationally. And even if that constrains, you still have these huge cash-rich governments looking to implement plans.